So the Department of Defense has seen a need to innovate and bring new capabilities. And they use the term at the speed of relevance and has created a number of accelerated acquisition approaches. So the US Air Force has created AFWERX to speed such innovation. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Col Nathan Diller, Director of AFWERX, and also the instigator of Agility Prime, which is now part of AFWERX, and his bio is on the Summit website. So, but saying that, I'd love to learn about his experience as a member of the French Test Pilot School. So that sounds kind of fairly wacky. So please have your questions ready. Use the Zoom chat function and direct the questions to me, and we'll make sure they'll get to Colonel Diller. So Colonel Diller, the floor is yours.
Super, thanks. How do you hear me, Wasim?
I can hear you, fantastic.
All right, great, and see me as well, if you must. So yeah, the French Test Pilot School, when apparently they need entertainment, they take the guy that has always wanted to go to test pilot school and checked every box, not any thought that they would send a dumb Texan to go learn French, never spoken French before, and spend a year. It was a fantastic experience with the French. Obviously, pioneers in aviation, amazing work that they continue to do, opportunities to get to fly Rafales and Airbus and do soaring in the Alps. So it was great. Thanks for the intro there. Thanks to AUVSI for all the great work that they do in building the ecosystem that's necessary to do this. I'm going to bring up a few slides if I can share those, if that is possible and helpful in any way. Okay, great. Let's see if we can see these here. So I'm going to walk briefly through, as Wasim mentioned, the work that we're looking to do in trying to accelerate change, as our Chief of Staff of the Air Force has asked us to do. And this acceleration specifically comes through teaming. Through AFworks, we've been going now for about 3 years with AFworks, but a pretty significant restructuring over the last 6 months to take a few different innovation efforts and bring them together under one AFworks, really focused on delivering new and innovative hardware and software through partnership with technology, using in more creative ways some of the talent of our airmen out there, looking to get to, most importantly, that transition that actually is bringing the capability to the field, that's actually creating those commercial markets, and that, when possible, leveraging in many cases investment to provide that return on investment. And so I'll walk through initially some slides talking about our general approach with AFworks. And then following that, I'll get into some more details associated with Agility Prime. Agility Prime, obviously, we are very interested in unmanned vehicles. We are interested in the potential of optionally manned, optionally remote, and optionally autonomous. And it sounds like someone's getting a little bit of feedback from somewhere. I'll let the experts on sound there go ahead and pipe up if there's something I can do for that.
Let's make sure if we're not speaking, we'll go on mute.
So I'll walk a little bit through, like I said, big picture AFworks, and then walk in some more detail the things that we've done over 2020 as we launched Agility Prime, one of our first major efforts in AFworks, and then what we're looking to do in 2021, hopefully continuing to build that partnership, building that teamwork with those of you out there across industry, across, in some cases, the interagency. You might see some of the state and local work that we've done. We are certainly looking to continue to expand that. Those partnerships are absolutely essential. Looking into this next year as well, where can we find opportunity to work more closely with our international partners? There's some amazing technology out there internationally, as well as opportunities for our international partners to experience not only the technology, but maybe some of the processes that we're using. So I'll walk through that briefly through this set of slides here. So AFworks, the mission of AFworks is to transition agile, affordable, and accelerated capability through this teaming of commercial technology developers with our airmen and Guardian talent. That Guardian word, a little bit of a new word for us in the Department of Defense, as the Space Force celebrated their first year anniversary. They're now known as our Guardians. So AFworks supports not only the Air Force, but also the U.S. Space Forces. bringing together, as I mentioned, 3 different efforts that started out really as ad hoc innovation efforts. One of them, AFWERX, where we were going out to our airmen across the Air Force and seeing how they could take ideas, interesting ideas, different potential use cases, for example, of small UAS. Where are there areas that would enable an entirely new capability that we didn't have before? Where do they get that technology? Well, that is through our AFVentures team that you'll see there. AFVentures is this group who they've been using our small business innovation research tools to be able to reach out since inception, over 1,400 companies. Of those companies, 70% of those companies are first-time partners with the Department of Defense. So these are entirely new types of technologies that are out there with entirely new players, so that we can take that airman talent, those great ideas, team it with the ideas that are coming from the technologists out there. So that actual technology paired with that talent, and then eventually moving that to transition. How do we transition that into a commercial capability, accelerating those nascent markets, and then eventually also building up some of the military capabilities we're doing that. So just quickly, I'll walk through a bit of a cartoon of this. Our current talent base that we've used, I spent a few years in the Pentagon, and clearly experts there in the Pentagon, that's a small part of the overall operator that we have out there that have important roles to play in this capability development. We have current capabilities in our Department of the Air Force. We have, as you probably have heard, this idea of this valley of death, the very difficult work that we do in the acquisition business of taking the treasure of the taxpayer and turning it into operational capability to make sure that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians have what they need to protect our nation. And that requires a lot of oversight. In some cases, we have created this process where we take traditional industry, we take it through this large acquisition process that has a huge number of checks and balances to make sure that we do not have any missteps as we are taking that treasure and turning it into capability. What we've hypothesized with AFWERX is that there are ways potentially, as we see a growth in research and development, where now today in the world, over 80% of our nation's research and development comes from commercial companies. Are there ways that we can expand this portfolio of capabilities? Things like our joint all-domain command and control, things like artificial intelligence, autonomy. I can feed a list of buzzwords that are there, but it's interesting the things that have started to happen in our capability development, actually taking and turning some of these ideas, turning these buzzwords into reality. In AFWERX, we're hoping, and what we have proposed, is that we are actually able to take capability development in the Air Force and help also support our gross domestic product, increasing economic advantage overall, while we're also preserving the security of the nation. How are we going to do that? Well, our thought is that if we can start to use 21st century techniques of connecting our airmen, our Guardians, the talent that we have out there across maintainers, across cyber experts, pilots, if we must, how do we get those folks who wake up every morning, they see a problem, they have a passion for solving that problem, how do we connect them and expand that overall talent base? So that when we look at this world where 80% of the technology is in the commercial sector, how do they posture themselves so that they're actually leveraging that 80%? Actually taking maybe an idea that a technologist had out there that wasn't quite ready for market or didn't necessarily have the right use case. We can potentially find those use cases early. We can build that Air Force market early, potentially expand that into broader, a joint market with our other services, into a federal government market, especially in cases where we have a highly regulated market. Where can we go and start to develop data? We create processes to accelerate that. Eventually, once we have that technology and that talent together, with great ideas paired with that great hardware or software, there's still that challenge of the valley of death. And so this is where Agility Prime comes in, and where Agility Prime has looked at really 3 key objectives. One objective is strategic. This industrial base where the United States has a long and distinguished history of preserving both our economic and our military advantage through aerospace and defense? And how do we ensure that that continues to happen? I think we felt that there was a bit of a slip in the small UAS market where we did not necessarily maintain that competitive advantage. And so are there ways that we can be more proactive in this advanced air mobility market, this electric vertical takeoff and landing market, so that if, as Morgan Stanley has suggested, a $1.5 trillion market emerges over the next 20 years, what do we do to make sure that we are postured, that we don't leave this technology to be developed exclusively in another country or exclusively in a place where we may not have access to it at all? And from that perspective, from that overall strategy, what do we do? How might we prime that market and make sure that that market is realized here in the United States? And I think you'll see as we walk through what we've done over 2020, there is some success in developing that market here and doing it at paces that maybe were not necessarily foreseen by those familiar with the huge challenges of many of the bureaucratic processes that we have in place, either in the Department of Defense or more broadly across our federal government. So another piece of that is process. How do we make sure that we are flying vehicles that have the appropriate safety and security measures? And so we have a variety of very rigorous processes to do that. What we've looked to do in Agility Prime, take airworthiness, for example. How can we take some new approaches to bring in a technology that you have in electric vertical takeoff and landing and very quickly get it through some type of an airworthiness so that we have, at least at the starting point, enough assurance that we are able to take on some of the liability of flying these aircraft ourselves, actually creating in the very near term revenue for those customers, for those companies that are out there producing the technology. And then ideally creating a data set that provides a broader understanding for commercial certification. Again, bringing it to not only commercialization in the Department of Defense, but commercialization across that broader commercial market. So that strategic piece, the process piece, and then lastly, we intend to field in 2023 some subset of these technologies. We divided them up into 3 areas of interest. One of them meets what many think of as the urban air mobility paradigm, a 3 to 6 passenger vehicle. We've also had a lot of interest in exploring in our area of interest number 2, the 1 to 2 passenger vehicle, largely because many of these vehicles are very advanced in the testing that's been done, because they've been able to leverage things like FAA Part 103 for ultralight flight operations. And then our area of interest 3, maybe more interesting to this crowd, is the unmanned versions. Our other services have spent a lot of time in the group 1 through 3 world. We specifically looked for those max gross takeoff weights of greater than 1,320 pounds. Looking for something that's larger. In many cases, the manufacturers that are out there now have been exploring interesting hybrid modes that would allow us to have the advantage of distributed electric propulsion, while we are able to still leverage, in some cases, alternative approaches to power storage, still using, in some cases, hybrid with some type of a fossil fuel, but also companies that are looking into hydrogen as well. All that helping us get to some level of range extension, as well as some of the companies looking at things like modularity. How can you quickly attach and detach different types of payloads there? So that's also been of interest to us. So that's the approach that we've been taking. I'll walk you quickly through and our overall strategy of reducing risk, the technological risk, through sharing in what I'll talk to in this air race, sharing our different capabilities that are there that allow these companies to maybe do testing sooner than they would have been able to otherwise, to use some of the wind tunnels, potentially do some of the cyber testing to ensure cyber hardening, to be able to use our ranges in many cases, things like ground vibration testing. So reducing that technical risk, reducing the regulatory risk, and then reducing that financial risk. Can we be an early adopter of this technology? As I'll talk to here shortly, we have begun a variety of these contracting activities, bringing in actually hundreds of companies through one of our efforts in cooperation with universities and research institutions. So we launched last February this Air Race to Certification across those 3 areas of interest. You can see the details there. Our first request for information went out 17 December of 2020, and we had, for pacing reasons, asked that anyone applying to the air race, this air race to certification, anyone who is going to apply to our air race have a path to fly in 2020. And as we did that, we had just under 20 different companies that apply. We had, as you might have seen in our AFworks Accelerate event, go to AFworks.com, you can see the videos from all of that Accelerate event. Some of the key companies who made notable progress in flying in 2020. We have since extended that air race for another year into 2021 with the pace that we're able to maintain given the overall number of personnel we have in AFworks through the Agility Prime program. Looking to bring more of those companies in. We have just over the last month had another almost 10 companies apply to this air race for this next year. So we're excited to see those companies come in. This contract starts with a request for prototype proposal and then allows us to quickly accelerate at the pace of the company, ideally towards what could be a multi-million-dollar production contract through that. We did the launch in April of 2020. Had some 4,000 registrants for that walkthrough. If you want to see any of those videos and some of the folks that we brought in for that, the Secretary of Transportation, our Air Force leadership, had NASA leadership there, investors and industry leaders. You can go to AFworks.com to see some of that background and the approach, as well as some detailed discussions about how this air race works specifically and how we plan to go forward with it. But that launch then quickly turned into a series of webinars describing our general approach over the next year. Those webinars are still posted there at agilityprime.com. You can see all the videos that we went through, different approaches to autonomy, looking at things like supply chain, identifying some of the challenges and opportunities in simplified vehicle operations. By May of last year, we had 2 of our companies get through that first hurdle in the air race to certification, Beta and Joby, companies who have both since been flying very regularly. Some of the leaders in this market among our partners, and that really took them to that first step. We also got approval for our airworthiness process internal to the Air Force. So as you can imagine, a variety of new technologies here. Our airworthiness authorities went through an approach that we offered to look at the different disciplines, engineering disciplines, the ones that were necessary to provide assurance that we could take the ongoing liability should we choose to fly these for revenue with these companies, which we will be doing this month. We also opened up a trade show and this ecosystem. We have over 350 companies that are now registered in that ecosystem. You can find that ecosystem also at agilityprime.com. We also, during July, launched a small business technology transfer program where we had over 300 applicants. We have had 250 companies, and those companies are combined with another research institute or with a university that is now in the process of building out things like autonomy, like different approaches for sensors, for sensitive void, ground networks that would allow large-scale operations with multiple vehicles in the air, different approaches to hybrid and range extension. So excited to have over $38 million of investment that we put across universities, these research institutions, and companies. In August, we did our first manned flight. This was just a few miles from downtown Austin with our Secretary of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Air Force in LIFT's Hexa. And LIFT is one of our performers that has been doing manned flight, will be beginning flight with us. They have some of their vehicles in the Ohio, around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where we will continue to do those flights. There's also a visit to industry. One of the many that we had, our Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force went to Vermont to see Beta Technologies and the progress that they're making on developing their aircraft, doing flight tests of their aircraft. We had the release of that STTR then, that $38 million in November. And then in December, we went through that airworthiness, received the first airworthiness approval for one of our companies, and will now be quickly moving into our flight tests. So in 2020, we awarded over $100 million of contracts. Many of those went to universities. We got through that airworthiness plan, the trade show that was there with a variety of different webinars, bringing different folks together across the community, being able to fly over this next year into 2021, one of our top priorities. We released that class of 2021 solicitation, if you will, expecting many of these new participants potentially being fast followers. I think you will be surprised with the exciting things you see. Companies starting to do pairing with large automotive industry, with some of the large airlines in order to accelerate this capability. Flights that we expect to do, training that we're going to be kicking off. What does it look like to build a training syllabus for our future military pilots? But we're also collaborating closely with the FAA on their flight operations as we build out simulators. We broke ground on some of the first simulators back in December, both in the DC area and in the Ohio area. And then we will be continuing with that simulation work. We also cut the ribbon on electric charging station in the Ohio area that will soon be supporting some of those flights. So looking to begin flying, begin buying, looking to see where those procurement contracts look like as we take this new approach, right? This idea that we're in a third revolution in aerospace with advances in different approaches to materials, this new approach to distributed electric propulsion, and exciting things happening in autonomy that allow us to get to a future potentially where we are able to scale and slide along a scale between either fully manned and piloted, some type of remotely piloted, or potentially looking into those fully autonomous operations and expecting to have forward progress across the year of 2021 in those three different areas. So with that, thank you all for your time. If you have any questions on how you can participate, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at AFWERX.com. You can see a lot more details specific to Agility Prime at agilityprime.com, and look forward to the partnership. Thanks so much to AUVSI for the great catalyst that you provide in accelerating this new and exciting technology area.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nate, Colonel Diller. So I love your handle. What's your handle? Sixth off?
Yeah, so I actually had the pleasure of spending a first couple of years right after the Air Force Academy there in the Massachusetts area where some of you are right now, and having done a couple of graduate degrees, one of them in engineering. When I showed up to my first fighter squadron, there was a question of what a sixth off model was. It was a fly-out model for one of our weapon systems, and I was stupid enough to answer the question as opposed to keep my mouth shut. So VDOF or sixth off. So painfully unique, I think, is what they say.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so fantastic. So I'll ask a couple of questions now. I've got a few now. People are asking some questions, but right off the bat, you talked about a number of different things that have interested to me, right? So the valley of death. So you talked about, this is a mechanism to move from the S&T sort of world into, get past this valley of death chasm into, some of the development integration programs. Is that still the plan? And how do you see those two things linking?
And so we have focused very much, our strategy with Agility Prime has been one where we're primarily looking to accelerate companies that have already gone largely through the research and development. So we did put the $30 million of contracts across a variety of different companies for some of those lower tech. But as we look into this next year, so that valley of death requires building out logistics and sustainment plans. That valley of death requires building out these training, the syllabus, for training. The valley of death requires long-term budgeting, contracting. And so we're putting together all of those pieces. Part of that has come through a structure to teaming that we've taken right at the outset. So AFworks is now under the Air Force Research Laboratory. So from the beginning, we've worked very closely both with a lab so that we understand the technology. We have a partnership also from the beginning with our program executive office. This is the acquisition transition agent that's there, as well as the partnership across the warfighting community. Those folks in the operators that are out there that actually create the demand signal. And so over this next year, we've had an approach to analytics that goes across those different major commands that provide that pool to help develop the different use cases and really put the numbers to those from a business perspective. We've also been doing some partnership with the commercial sector to see where our business case aligns with the commercial sector business case. And so that business case development that's fed in to a test program where you're getting continuous data to get the latest data into that business case development has done much, we think, to help accelerate, create that pool, while at the same time, we're doing some of the hard work of those bureaucratic processes, but they're processes, they're there for good reasons, checks and balances.
Fantastic. So part of the Agility Prime thing is kind of fascinating. So we're doing so much work in terms of, you call them ORBs, but these resupply buses. So what are the use cases for taking some of this commercial aircraft, as it were, and how do you map them back into the Air Force's use cases or DoD in general? And because I can see, the Navy and the Marines and the Army would like to do similar type things.
Absolutely. So the Marine Corps actually has been partnering with us. They put some funding into the program. They've expressed some interest in some of our training work that we're doing, some of the work that we're looking to accelerate autonomy. Our use cases, I saw a question about specifically that area of interest number 2. There's, in some cases we are looking in and around bases. Where do we need to get just one individual that could be, patrolling a base area? Where could you have a first responder? If we get to a simplified operations approach where I can have someone who is trained as a medic that can show up, well before a larger medical team, you can maybe quickly solve some of the early challenges from a first responder perspective as well. So those are a couple. We have over 20 different use cases. You can go to that agilityprime.com site. You can get 90 minutes there of a variety of different use cases, as well as we had an update to that at AFworks.com. Some more of those. Those use cases look like, though, in some cases, autonomous logistics, completely unmanned. Use cases where we would do medical evacuation, where we would bring in supplies, or we would bring in, maybe a maintainer. A lot of times our exquisite systems, as we look to distribute them, we don't want a supply, that is at a broadly distributed area. So we'll bring in the part and the maintainer at the same time. So we've gone across about 20 different use cases in what is generally, the mundane logistics work, but also in many cases the heroic work that happens with our first responders, doing some work, what it might look like to use these in different firefighting cases as well. So working, with the interagency where we can find those joint use cases.
Thank you. So we have so many more questions. I have a whole set that I want to ask you, but I think we're out of time. So perhaps we can forward them to you and work out a process where you can respond to some of our constituency here.
Absolutely.
Col Diller. I mean, I have some. So off the top of my head, we talk a lot about aircraft. What about all for us, what about all the infrastructure that's needed to actually support all this, right? So, we talk about sensors, CNS, ATM, automation, all the caboodle that normally takes place. Is that part of the plan within AFWERX?
It is, yes. We've done some partnership with NASA on the UTM. We did, like I said, the ribbon cutting on the first charging station. Several of these companies have done some pretty advanced work on what it would look like to have relatively mobile charging capabilities. So that infrastructure is certainly a piece that we're going to need. It's a piece that is needed for the commercial sector. And those partnerships are ones that we have begun on and look to continue to expand.
Fantastic. So Colonel Diller, let me say thank you. Thank you for your insightful comments. And I think we're out of time now. So thank you again for supporting the AUVSINE New England chapter and the whole regional infrastructure that we have here. Thank you.
Super. Thank you all for the great work that you're doing. Exciting 2021 we have lined up here.